Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirt the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, talking bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming live from my den here at the heart of the northwest of England. I'm completely surrounded by my stuff, ready to be played and added to the great library of RPGs, along with my Grognard Files. This time I've got my haul from this year's UK Games Expo, which took place earlier this month. I got the Reign of Terror, the Call of Cthulhu adventure book from Chaosium, set against the background of the French Revolution. It was originally conceived as a historical interlude during the Horror on the Orient Express campaign, but it's perfect as a couple of standalone investigations. I'm scheduled to play it with Blythy and Eddy in a couple of months. I also got The Spire, an indie game of drow shenanigans in a high tower as the players mount an insurgency against their elvish overlords. I also picked up Carphaneum, the role-playing game of the Ancient Worlds and Arabian Nights, a Ray Harryhausen RPG. Talking of which, here on my left is my ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. I'll just give it a tap. What's this? She's standing next to a man wearing a toupee woven from wire. He's making hand gestures towards me. And what's that by their side? R2-D2? No, it's a remote-controlled bin. Yes, it's the eternal champion hitting 1980s primetime television in 3, 2, 1. I did the hand thing. We've made 50 podcasts of this rubbish, and you could waste 3 days end to end listening to what we've churned out over the past 3 years. Yet we haven't devoted an episode to the mainstay of our gaming life back in the day, White Dwarf. It was first published in July of 1977 by Games Workshop, and White Dwarf was the RPG platform, the connection to others, and a reminder that there were other people playing these games other than us. In the first 100 or so issues, it covered everything from D&D to Car Wars. In this part of the episode, I talked to Mike Brunton about his early years in the hobby and his experiences at TSR UK, and as a professional rules lawyer and general fixer for Imagine magazine. This part ends at the point where he joins Games Workshop. Next time, we talk in a bit more detail about his time at Games Workshop and his stint as the editor of White Dwarf. In the interview, we also mentioned the impact that zines had on gaming culture in the mid-80s. One of the mainstays of the zine scene was Quasits and Quasars, and we have Neil Hopkins, one of the contributors who helped shape the fanzine's content, and is the Grog Squad guest on First, Last and Everything. One of the pages that we scrutinised in White Dwarf was the small ads. We were desperate to find people to play with. We'd look at people who'd fit our precise criteria. Oh, this one looks promising, but it's in Wigan, and that's miles away. It's only in the next town to Bolton, but it might as well have been St Ives when you're 12. This one looks good, but he's 10. Far too young. We don't want to be playing with kids. This one's near, and the right age. But chivalry and sorcery, that sounds bobbins. There was nothing else for it. We needed to put an advert in White Dwarf ourselves. FRP, Bolton. Our small Bolton-based club is in need of players and GMs for RuneQuest, Traveller, D&D, TNT and others. No experience needed, just imagination. 13 to 18-year-olds, please contact. We waited a while for a response, but when a group of lads turned up to Blythy's house, he wasn't in. His mum had sent him away on a night school course, as she had a dream of him becoming a technical whiz kid in the white heat of information technology. She didn't get their names either, but she said that one of them had a feather in his hat. We visit Ed in his shed, who relates the story of that fateful night. Finally, I'm joined in the attic with Blythy, thumbing over our old copies of the magazine and reflecting on some of the highlights. Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Open box.
Welcome to Open Box, part of the podcast where we look backwards to look forwards. And this time I'm in the room of role-playing rambling with Mike Brunton, a familiar name from the heyday of RPGs. Hello, Mike.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
No, you're welcome.
And we're going to go into this virtual time machine back to way back in your past. So the question I always ask to start off with is, how did you get into RPGs and who were you playing with?
I got into RPGs completely by accident. It literally was pure chance that I happened to pick up this strange little wooden pattern box in a shop called the Bradford Train Shop Supermarket. And this would be in 75. It was a really strange shop. It was in a terraced house in Bradford. Downstairs was all model railways. Upstairs was all war games. So it was a very strange shop. They had a system where you could take things back and swap them, and they would give you vouchers if you spent a certain amount of money. And I bought a couple of sets of war games rules from them. And I went in again, and I just saw this box set, and I thought, oh, TSR, I've bought one of their games before. I bought something called Warriors of Mars, which was their fairly badly illustrated, I think is the best way to describe it. Actually, the illustrations were appalling. John Carter title from 74. And I thought, well, it's going to be worth a punt. So I picked it up, bought it, and it was utterly confusing. And it made no sense. The original first edition D&D set made absolutely no sense whatsoever until you'd read it about 20 times, and then you began to see that there was something in there. It just hooked me, if only trying to find out how it worked. And I ended up, and this was 74, 75-ish, probably 75. Didn't really play it that much until maybe 76, 77, when White Dwarf started, just before White Dwarf appeared. And in 78, I went to college in Huddersfield, and there was a Wargame Society in Huddersfield, which went by the splendid title of the Kirklees Military Modelling and Gaming Society. And one of the guys who was there was a guy called Tom Kirby.
Ah, right.
And that's where I really got started playing every week. And I ended up being one of the people, because I'd read the rule book, kind of got my head around how it worked. I ended up being one of the people who was a regular DM at that. Tom at that point was a tax inspector of all things. And he got a job at TSR a couple of years later. And I ended up staying with the Wargame Society and doing bits and pieces there. One of the kind of wargaming jobs I ended up doing was painting toy soldiers and acting as the intro DM for everybody who joined the club. So I'd have the novices table, as it were, at the club, and run that.
And what kind of games were there?
Well, it was. Well, let's see. At that point, there was you had a massive choice of Dungeons and Dragons, or Metamorphosis Alpha, or Tunnels and Trolls, or Traveller, and that was it. That was your games. And then later on, there were various. It was one of these periods where, a bit like being a medieval scholar, you could read every rule book in existence. Because there were only about 25 rule books in existence. There was Empire of the Petal Throne, and then RuneQuest came along, and then Chivalry and Sorcery, and then Twilight 2000, and the Morrow Project, and all the rest of them. And you could end up with a big collection of games fairly quickly that covered everything. and have them all, because there weren't hundreds and hundreds of separate rule sets. So we ended up doing quite a lot of different things. But everybody tended to gravitate back to D&D because it was kind of the common thing.
Yes.
So there was a table of people, or at least 3 or 4 tables of people playing D&D, and probably somebody playing Traveller every week and every other weekend. I ended up getting into the business, as it were, purely by chance, because Tom remembered that I could paint toy soldiers. TSR needed somebody to paint some toy soldiers for some adverts. The old, I don't know whether you ever saw them, D&D Grenadier miniatures.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so they sent me a box set and said, can you paint these and send them back? And I did. And then they wanted me to do some more. And after that, it carried on like that. And then eventually they said, do you want a job? And I said, well, yeah. Doing what? And they went, well, painting some toy soldiers, bits and pieces. And I went, yeah, okay, where do I sign up? And I was in. It was pure spawny chance. There was no skill or judgment involved. It was luck rather than anything else, I think, looking back. I would spend a day a week doing toy soldiers, which were then either used in adverts or given to shops or given to customers or whatever. And I also ended up doing things like running the invoicing system for the accounts department and answering the post. And I was the rules query guy for a while. Actually, for most of my career at TSR, I answered the rules queries. So if I screwed up your game and you're listening, I do apologise. I didn't mean to, but that was the kind of things I was doing. And then when Imagine came along, they needed somebody to go onto that to look after the technical side of the articles.
Technical side, so that's like statistics and stat blocks and that kind of thing.
Yeah, making sure the rules are followed. TSR was going through one of these very weird phases where they suddenly got trademarks, so everything had to be trademarked.
So you're the person who had to put the TMs on everything?
Yeah, well, one of them. It was.
There was an army of them.
There was basically if you it was one of these things where you would get shouted at if you didn't put the trademarks on properly, because at that point nobody really knew how serious trademarking and they knew that intellectual property was quite important, but they didn't quite know exactly what the rules were going to be, so they were very cautious about it. Hence the Indiana Jones thing of putting a TM on Nazis in Indiana Jones, which of course is the famous one that everybody now mocks. But what they were doing there is they knew that every name in the Indiana Jones game was a trademark of Lucasfilm, so they were protecting Lucasfilm, and they didn't think it through. So it wasn't them being stupid; it was them actually trying to do the right thing by a business partner. It ended up looking stupid. So I ended up doing a bit of everything. At times I'd be sent down to the warehouse to pack orders and things like that. It was just one of those jobs.
And you were a bit of a troubleshooter as well on the articles, weren't you? Because I know that there's lots of stories of things being pulled at the last minute and that kind of thing.
Well,
so
there were a few problems with articles occasionally, down to the fact that I think it was early days and nobody knew what they were doing. We were learning every issue, and all the writers were still learning every issue as well. They didn't, things like the modules came out, and it was a big surprise to everybody what they were. I think people forget how groundbreaking things like the Giants modules were and the Drow modules. AD&D and D&D, and they were a big change. It was a step change. It was kind of like, we've moved from just like little scribbled drawings on a bit of graph paper through to having something that looks like a serious product. So we would get things in, and sometimes they would be written in a very notey way because people had written them for their own use, and then that's not quite what you want to put on a page for somebody else to read, because your notes make sense to you, but they won't make sense to anybody else. So we had to turn them into something that was kind of readable English and that the rules were followed properly. Because although nobody follows rules, if they're honest, they're just using them as guidelines, and people roll the dice for the noise. I roll the dice for the noise if I ever run anything. I don't necessarily go with the numbers that are on the dice. I go with what's going to be dramatic and keep things moving. But the rules have to be right at the time of publication, if you see what I mean. So that needed somebody to go through and do things with, which meant I ended up reading a lot of rule sets.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I always say that this period of RPG history is fascinating because that step change was taking place where people start to realise the potential of making stories rather than just, as you say, moving pieces around on the table.
Yes, it moved from go in the room, kill everybody, get the treasure, go in the next room, kill everybody, get the treasure, to having a storyline where you were trying to find out what the hell was going on and who the real baddies were. And I think things like the British modules, in particular the U series and the UK ones, really raised the game on that. And so did things like Dragonlance as well, which had an epic sweep to it, which was a first in a lot of ways. And some of the stuff we were doing in the magazine was interesting because it was a small scale, so you could try things out. And if it went wrong, there was going to be another one along next month, and people would forget the bad ones, hopefully, and just remember the good ones. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. Hopefully they did forget the bad ones, because there were one or two that I did looking back, which, weren't great. There were a couple that were quite good.
So which are the ones that you're proudest of that appeared in Imagine?
I think the ones that worked best. I actually had to go back and look and find out what I did do on Imagine, by the way, before talking to you, because I had to take on pseudonyms at times. I was told your name's. My favourite quote when I was working at TSR was, "Your name's appearing too bloody often in this magazine." That was from Keith. That was from Keith, the editor, and he was getting a bit worried that he didn't look like we had a broad enough base of people.
So what were some of the names that you used then?
Well, actually, I found them. John Tantoblin, a Tantoblin being a poo in medieval slang. I went on. I was done on one as Flashman on the heading page. It was the thing about guilty of court. And then right at the end they gave me the correct name credit. I never understood that one, and it turns out I had a hand in about 12 of them. The best one I think was probably the Bushido one.
Oh yes,
because it was very strange. And there were no undead in Japanese myth, but I managed to get an undead guys in there without violating Japanese myth. The dying words of a monk had cursed them, so they couldn't die, but they still took all the wounds that were going on, and they had to be stitched back together again with gold thread and things like that. Otherwise, they fell to pieces as the thread rotted. And it was a macabre set of imagery, really, of these guys held together with gold thread, samurai, trying to drink themselves to death in the hope of forgetting how bad everything had got. And it's quite a disturbing image when you put it like that, but it worked. So I think that one worked. The one that was most fun was definitely getting a writing credit with Michael Moorcock.
Yes, of course. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
That was. I am still chuffed about that. 30 years later, I got a very small writing credit with Michael Moorcock. Because that's just great.
So how did that come about?
That was down to Mr. Coburn. Wanted to do a Moorcock special and managed to get in touch with Moorcock's publishers, I think, and they weren't averse to the idea and proposed it to Moorcock, and he wasn't available at that point to actually write anything, but he gave us free use of one of his background worlds and sent us his notes, which was the Earl Orbeck stuff. Yeah. So we knew we had the use of that hero, and we had to run past him with everything that we came up with. Or I came up with. And in the end, I don't think he asked for any changes at all. He was quite pleased with what we'd done, including all the artwork that Jez Goodwin, of all people, the figure designer, did back in the day, because he was starting out at that point as well, and he did some really nice Moorcocky artwork.
It is very good. Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, it's a good scenario.
I think I was really, and I got a nice letter from him in the end actually to say that he was pleased with it. And he felt it had done the character proud, so I was really pleased with that. I think that one worked best of all.
I was just going to say, it's good to hear that, because you always get the sense with Moorcock that he has a bit of a love-hate relationship with the hobby because of things that have happened later.
I think he's probably like, this is going to sound terrible, I think he's probably like a few older people. He doesn't maybe get it. It's just possible, because he's an extraordinarily good writer. I mean, you read his mainstream fiction and it's brilliant, and you read his science fiction and his fantasy, and it's how he was cranking out books at that rate when he was younger. I do not know. It's incredible mind and energy in that man, and his inventiveness is superb. He didn't ever get diverted into that kind of hobby games world at all. And now, of course, people are going the opposite way and coming out of it. People like Charles Stross started on White Dwarf, writing little articles for White Dwarf. And now, he's writing the Laundry series of novels. And there are others as well. And you can see from some people some people's writing styles. Like, yeah, you started playing D&D, didn't you?
Yes. Yeah.
You did, didn't you? And it's kind of, there's nothing wrong with that. It's great that people draw inspiration from the whole sort of, you could break out into a chorus of the Circle of Life at this point and go, oh, look, it's, it is that touch of kind of things go round and come round. So I'm not sure that Moorcock, I don't think he was well served by some of the games that came out based on his stuff. Some were great. Some of the Chaosium stuff was really, really good. And some of it was kind of like, well, it's all right, but it doesn't look very good. It's like the content is there, but the presentation is not. It's not as good as it could be, should we say.
I think he's expressed unhappiness as well about how some of the Warhammer imagery borrowed heavily from his work.
I think he's entitled to a little bit of that. Yeah, I mean, I freely admit that I read all of Moorcock's books when in the 70s and 80s. Just did, and I've still got a few Moorcocks on the shelf. Now, he was certainly a background influence, but then so was H.P. Lovecraft, and so was Lord Dunsany, and so were, to a lesser extent, people like Tolkien were as well. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that feeds into Warhammer and gets chewed up and spat out the other end of their sausage machine.
Yeah. Oh, as in all role-playing games, we borrow freely, don't we, and reprocess. So that's part of the...
Yeah. It just the way it works is that sometimes you put something down and you don't know where it's come from, and then later on you'll see something and you think, that's where it's from. It's from that idea came from somewhere else, a particular writer. And it's not that you deliberately set out to copy it. It's just that it was in your head somewhere, lurking away. And it's true. I think that's true of anybody who's doing anything. I mean, movies are notorious for borrowing and homage. And I think all role-playing games do little homages to everything.
Yes.
There's little bits in all role-playing games. And if I can't say that I was never influenced by Moorcock, because I must have been. Because he was it was my favourite writer when I was a teenager growing up.
Yeah.
So, I read Moorcock and Frank Herbert's Dune before I got to Lord of the Rings, which kind of spoiled Lord of the Rings for me a little bit because it wasn't brutal enough,
Oh, good. It's good to hear that, because that was my experience as well. I read all the pulp of Robert E. Howard and Moorcock.
Exactly, yeah.
With that action on every other page. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, Robert E. Howard is a case in point. That surely is the biggest influence, and so is Edgar Rice Burroughs, but nobody ever credits him because he was there writing. Princess of Mars, 1912, it was published, so it's got to have had an influence on later stuff. It can't not. And it's like all the space opera stuff is E. Doc Smith. The Lensman series. Space Marines are mentioned in the Lensman books. There are these big hulking Space Marine guys all armed with boarding axes, which is, if you think about it, completely insane for spaceships, but sounds cool.
When you were doing this work on Imagine, the fanzine scene was in full swing, gaming fandom.
It was, yes. A guy called Pete Tamling was our sort of fanzine correspondent, if I remember rightly.
And Mike Lewis as well, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. And Mark Gascoigne and Ian Marsh came out of the fanzine scene as well.
And I've been looking back at some of the stuff that was happening around that time, and you can see the debates around. They used to call them Irving's and Monty Hall, and this elevation of something called role playing rather than constant fights.
Yes, constant fights. Or yes, it was almost like there was two sides to the coin. And you were either a role player or you were a hack and slash. Yeah. And there was, what occasionally gets referred to these days as murder hobos.
Exactly.
I don't know if you heard. It's kind of like, and I could never understand it because as far as I was concerned, if you were having fun, you were getting the point of games. You're not. If you start going, oh, you're not playing that properly and holding your hand up to your forehead like some kind of fainting violet, then you've kind of missed the point of what you're doing. You're supposed to be having a bit of fun with your mates on a whatever evening it is, with either a curry or a beer, and and just enjoying yourselves. And I never got this kind of one true purity thing that you had to role play.
Yes.
Yeah, no, yeah, role playing is fine. It's great. You role play as much as you like, but remember that other people just want to go in and hack the head off an orc. That's what they're there. That's their idea of fun. It's like saying you can play Monopoly, or you can play Monopoly where you've all got a knife. And it's like, and you're not playing one true Monopoly unless you've all got a knife or a gun at the table. And if somebody double crosses you, you can chop their fingers off. And yeah, it's kind of no, that's not fun.
Yeah.
You
No,
know?
I'm not playing Monopoly with you.
No, it's yeah, no, I'm not allowed to play Monopoly with my other half because in her house it was definitely water the bread knife with Monopoly.
You also made the transition from Imagine to White Dwarf. So how did that come about?
Yes. Oh no, that would be company politics partly, which I don't really want to go into too much. TSR got very weird towards the end of my tenure there in the sort of mid 80s period, 85 ish, because there was a lot of trouble with them running out of money in America and Mr. Gygax being eased out by various factions and the Blooms and the Gygaxes fighting. And then Lorraine Williams arrived and she was going to save the company, and then she decided to get rid of Gary, and it all got very messy in America. And it was kind of a bit dramatic at times with the sweeping changes that were happening. Anyway, the UK was told to save money, and the way Don Turnbull, the guy who was running the company at the time, chose to save money was to load as many costs as he could onto Imagine and then shut the magazine down. And it must have looked brilliant on paper, but it meant that 5 of us lost our jobs. We finished issue 30. We were called in and given the white envelopes. We were all redundant, so I assumed that redundancy meant redundancy. So I said, right, okay, I'm going to the pub. And I went, well, I'm finished there. I've just been given the thank you very much and so long and thanks for all the fish letter. What then happened, I'm told, is that the marketing department went, where's Mike? And they all went, he's gone. Well, who's going to write the advertising? Because one of my other jobs, I displaced the advertising agency that we were using, and I was writing all the advertising for Europe. At that point, there was a sort of panicked, well, he's gone to the pub. Well, which pub? We don't know. So they dashed around looking at various pubs to try and find me. And when they did find me, I was sorry a little bit, and I was dragged back and told that if I wanted it, I could have a job. So I stayed sacked for about 3.5 hours. But this was terrible because everybody else was still given the bullet. So I sat in the editorial office with 4 empty desks around me for months on end, writing advertising copy for people. Paul went off and started Games Master. Ran to about 5 or 6 issues, I think. We helped out on that a little bit, sort of undercover, as it were, I wrote a couple of things for him under a pseudonym. Other people did as well. TSR put some advertising his way. And then the next thing that happened that moved everything on was Tom decided he was going, and he went to work for Games Workshop, which was quite weird because none of us realised that he'd been quite unhappy. And then there was a small expedition mounted to Nottingham by various people, and I tagged along, not expecting to find anything out, and everybody was offered jobs, and I'd gone, and I don't think they knew really who I was, particularly because I wasn't one of the people who was writing rules material or module material. I was just one of the guys who happened to be at the TSR offices and did various jobs for them. So I ended up going to the studio. I ended up getting a job at the studio, and I started as assistant White Dwarf editor, which wasn't an entirely necessary post, shall we say. I mean, if Paul had carried on being the editor, it would have, he could have done it all on his own. But what happened was Paul saw me arrive, grinned from ear to ear, and virtually skipped off down the corridor to find something much more interesting to do than have to get a magazine out every month. So I don't blame him at all, because he immediately got to do much more. He got to do more interesting things like trying to find board games and major publishing things to do. And I took over from on the magazine, and it was again luck, I think. Really, it wasn't a formal interview process in that sense, other than Brian going, "Oh yeah." I think Brian knew me because I'd painted toy soldiers for a few years, and I knew him through Citadel and getting model soldiers off him. Beyond that, I don't really think they knew who I was or what I could do. particularly, other than I'd had a job at TSR, so I must have been okay because they wouldn't have kept me on otherwise. I ended up working for Workshop for what, about 4 years, 4.5, 5 years? Left in the end of 90.
And during that period, White Dwarf changed, didn't it, quite significantly? It became bigger and covered more games and had a different appearance.
There were quite a lot of things went on. The first thing was that the move from London had not been without problems.
Hello, my name is Neil Hopkins, also known as Thermal Satsuma over on Twitter. Dirk recognised my name from some old fanzines and asked me to contribute to this episode with my first, my last, my everything. So here we go. To set the scene, it's 1979 and I'm on my paper round before school. A magazine bundled in with the newspapers caught my eye. It was called Military Modelling, and between the painting guides for Napoleonic soldiers and Sherman tanks was an advert for a game called Tunnels and Trolls. The rule book was £3.50 if I recall correctly, about the same as my weekly earnings, but I think I just bought the Goblin Lake solo adventure on its own first, and then the rules a few weeks later. It was mind-blowing. I was that goblin, exploring Fish Squish Lake and meeting many untimely deaths before finally escaping with the treasure. I told my friends at school about it, and started mapping out dungeons on graph paper in the back of my maths book for them to explore. We soon moved on to AD&D, with side excursions into RuneQuest Traveller and later on Call of Cthulhu. Before too long, my friend Dave Hulks suggested starting a fanzine and came up with the appropriately alliterative name of Quasits and Quasars, because it had the bold ambition of having something for everyone with a mix of sci-fi and fantasy. My job was to write the solo adventures, which seemed to be a popular attraction for a lot of gamers without a regular group to play with. This was in the days when word processors and desktop publishing were a distant pipe dream, so everything was carefully typed on an old second-hand typewriter and carefully assembled into presentable pages with letter-set titles and illustrations cut and pasted into place. The whole lot was sent off to the printers, and after a week or so we'd get back a big box of loose pages to collate and staple into the finished product. It was actually pretty good, if I say so myself. We lasted for 10 issues, including a team-up with the venerable Dragon Lords, and made many friends in the zine scene, before we went off to different universities and eventually lost touch, as real life intervened. But that's another story. My last game was recently part of the virtual grog meet with a session of the Cthulhu Hack run by Sean Smith. This was my first experience of an online game like this, and after a few technical glitches everything ran smoothly. We were playing as a group of old school chums who'd been invited to a performance of The King in Yellow, and needless to say, things rapidly became very strange indeed. I just about escaped with my life, but unfortunately not my sanity. It was a thoroughly enjoyable way to play a game, with minimal rules and dice rolling handled through a web app, and I'm keen to try something similar again. My everything is a little more difficult to summarise. A few years ago, I bought myself a copy of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition box set, complete with miniatures and pre-generated characters and a beginner's adventure. Not having a gaming group to hand, I roped my family in to play, and we had a great time. Particular highlights were sparing a goblin who turned out to be a valuable, if somewhat unreliable, ally and a member of the Goblin Revolutionary Army, and a green dragon with an obsessive-compulsive need to count every piece of treasure in his hoard. As the game went on, I realised that I wasn't really paying attention to the rules, but rather letting the story develop as it went on, only occasionally rolling the dice behind the screen and sucking my teeth or saying, yes, that worked, as fitted the story. So, my everything then is games as stories. They are frameworks for our imagination, allowing us to collaborate on something together and often producing results that we could never have foreseen. I have been experimenting with writing some more interactive fiction using a tool called Twine, and I've also discovered a Tunnels and Trolls Facebook group with an ongoing game, where I am now a hob rogue exploring a dungeon with a group of fellow adventurers. It's great fun. So, thanks again for inviting me on the podcast, Dirk, and I hope to be able to play games and weave stories with you sometime in the future. Cheerio.
Right, I'm heading down the garden. Ah, the glorious 50th birthday shed is still there, still looking resplendent. I'll just give a knock.
Come in.
Hello there, Ed.
Hello there, Dirk.
I believe you've been down to that fancy London.
The old smoke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found my way through the smog to the Waterstones in London, to be honest.
And to meet a hero.
My only hero. When Eddy met Geddy. Or Jeddy.
And how did that go?
Very well, thank you. I had about 3 seconds with the man himself. And I was whisked away.
The restraining order.
You don't get long. You don't get long on these meets.
No. What did you say to him then?
I just said I've spent the best part of my teenage years trying to learn his damn bass line. And he had a good chuckle at that, and then I was escorted out rather promptly.
Under restraint.
Under restraint by the security.
Nice one. Well, in this episode, we're looking at White Dwarf.
Yeah.
And we've got the return of the bargainometer, because if people want to get their White Dwarfs and restore their collection,
Yeah.
I thought I'd come to you to find out how much things cost.
Okay.
Well, first of all, did you subscribe to White Dwarf? Did you get it on a regular basis?
No.
You
I
didn't?
was more pragmatic than that. I found White Dwarf was really good, but not every issue was really good. So I pick and chose what I liked. Usually someone else at the beginning, Herbs would bring it into school because he bought it every month, and then if it was really decent issue, I'd then go and buy it. If it wasn't, I didn't. I think I probably only bought about 10 issues in the whole
Really?
100. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it's worth saying that, isn't it? That, we wouldn't be sitting in this shed
No.
if it wasn't for White Dwarf.
That's right. Even though you only live round the corner. It's amazing we never bumped into each other in Boydell's toys or anything. Considering we were always in there.
Yeah, so it was a small lad in White Dwarf
Yeah.
that brought us together with you, Herbs, Winnie and Swab.
Yeah.
And
involved missing teeth and a hat with a feather in it. Just straight out of the fantasy tale, but it's true.
So tell the story, because I love this story. So what happened?
I think it was I'm not quite sure if it was the second time we went, or the first time we knocked on Blythy's door. There was about 3 or 4 of us, and he wasn't in. So then we all went back round to my house, which was, as we said, round the corner. Must have spent a couple of hours there. I don't know whether we played a game or just chatted, listening to records and what have you. And then Herbs and another lad, or 2 others, headed home. And en route, Herbs used to add to this, Herbs used to wear a hat, brimmed hat with a feather in it. And on his way home, some other roguish types shouted across the road, "Why are you wearing that hat?" To the guy who wasn't wearing the hat. Harris, he was called. And Harris said, "I don't know, ask him," pointing to Herbert. And at that moment, a fist shot out and caught Harris square on the teeth and knocks one of his prized front teeth out. And anyway, I don't know whether they ran off or just carried on walking, and they made it out alive.
Yeah. Welcome to Bolton.
Welcome to Bolton, yeah. It's a great lever.
Oh, that's great. So, very memorable. And of course, you turned up and Blythy wasn't in. And we went on the hunt for a man with a feather in his hat. All over the place. That's what we were looking for, because Blythy's mum said, "Yeah, there's a chap with a feather in his hat." We've seen a man with a feather in his hat. It was like something out of Jack Vance, looking for a man with a feather in his hat.
Meet on the market square. So, you never found him, did you?
We never found him,
No.
no. But it was a few months later, wasn't it, that we got together?
I think I don't know why we didn't go back round early. I think it's just, you do it once and you think you're not gained anything, but you're not lost anything, so you shrug your shoulders. And
Other than a tooth.
other than a tooth, yeah. You got a replacement, false one, which I presume he wears to this day.
So, White Dwarf, so you didn't have many of them, so which
No.
ones stand out for you?
I suppose if it was to pick, 3, probably the first one I got was the the Barroom Brawl one, which was White Dwarf 33, which is what you're featuring in your chat of it. That was the first one I ever got.
First one I got as well.
Even though I've been reading it for a while, because Herbs used to get it and he'd lend it to me. That was the first one I went out to buy. I think it's because it had a RuneQuest scenario in, and by that time we were just... When we started playing RuneQuest, we never looked back, so every other... If it was a D&D issue, I wouldn't bother buying it. So to me, if it had something RuneQuest in, I'd buy it, and that one had the scenario in. I don't know whether I hoped to run it, because it was just a brawl, as it said, but I mainly got it for the statistics.
Yeah.
So I could use them in other scenarios if I wanted to, because you never had any statistics unless you'd bought a big campaign pack, and for like 60p or whatever it was, you got like 20 statistics that you could use in something you was writing at the time. I don't know whether I did, but that's
how many times has Malop died, the lunar guy? Yeah.
Well, I say it was a lunar guide. You could kind of scratch his name out and use all the statistics as many times as you want. So it was... That's how I viewed it, the utility of the thing, not whether the magazine... I mean, I wasn't interested in town planning. I mean...
I've realised as well by reading that issue 33, that's the one where they talk about invisibility. And we used to have this debate about invisibility in RuneQuest. And it's got Greg Stafford saying he doesn't use it. He didn't lose it in his game.
I wonder whether we'd picked up on that. I don't remember reading that article, maybe I did, but we never used it for some reason. Us together, and us when I was playing with the lads at school. We never... I don't know why it never came in our radar to use it. I don't know whether was it a 4-point spell or something, so it was quite a hefty spell to have. You know, hard to get hold of. But because it is quite disruptive, isn't it?
Yeah, and I remember you having in your rulebook under Pixies, not invisible. You wrote it in. I'm sure in pen. Yeah.
Did I?
Yeah, not invisible.
How do you remember this stuff? I'm sure you've got copies of my stuff somewhere in your house.
I'm admitting to anything. Yeah, because he says in the article that it's Aldrimi myth that Pixies propaganda that Pixies are invisible. Yeah. Maybe that's why I transferred it to my rule book, but unless was it not in the errata of the... Possibly. What other issues?
I think, after that, I think it was a bit of a... I didn't buy many after that for a while, but then it got into the stage where it was publishing the Call of Cthulhu scenarios, and it went through maybe about 10, from about 50. And I have difficulty pinpointing one of my favourite ones around that time, but I do have a soft spot for 50, which is the Watchers of Walberswick, which is the very first scenario we played. Or Herbert ran it at school, and that's got us all really into it. I don't know, there's something about that scenario. It's a very basic scenario, but there's something quite, emotive to me. It's I think it's the atmosphere in a fishing village on the east coast of England or something. It's quite slightly different to the normal Cthulhu scenarios where it's gangsters and 1920s America. It's just more eerie, and I think that showed its full potential really as kind of like a horror game. So I have a soft spot for 50, but there's a few around that era that I think the Black Brew of Dice Scum, which is another good one. And that's probably one that I did have at the time because it had several things in. It had the scenario for RuneQuest, but it also had a few other things in there, which was a D&D scenario, which I could have utilised. But it also had a traveller thing in as well. And the good thing about White Dwarf, it had a lot of absolutely excellent traveller scenarios in. So if it coincided with a decent RuneQuest one or a Cthulhu one with a decent traveller scenario, then I would buy it. Do you know what I mean? You never have two RuneQuest or two Cthulhu. You'd always have one or the other. I never really bothered about D&D. So if it ticked 2 or 3 boxes, then I would buy that issue.
Yeah.
Especially if it was a Cthulhu scenario. In fact, most of the ones I got was a Cthulhu scenario. One was with a Cthulhu scenario in. The Bleeding Stone of Ipthar, and what number was that? Is it 60? I remember buying that one. Yeah. Because I think that's the first one I ran for you lot, I think.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
I don't think I'd ran one before then.
And so if you were going to recover it in your collection now, how much do they cost on average?
I think the price increases the lower the number. So if you're going, if you want anything after the 60th issue, you can probably get for about £5. maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. When it's dropped below 60, in the 30s, 40s and 60s, you're probably talking between a fiver and a tenner.
Yeah.
The nearer to fiver you get it for, it's a bargain. And anything below 30 is anybody's guess. I mean, 30s to the 10s, you probably take 10 to 20 quid. And then if you're getting the single finger issues, you can pay silly money for them. I mean, you could put 30, 40 quid, I've seen them for. But I wouldn't buy them, personally, because they're rubbish. Unless you're a completionist who wants to get every single issue. But I'm not interested in some of the articles, which were mainly D&D in the very early days.
Yeah.
To me, the main highlight of the White Dwarf, the best era, was around about the 30 to 70 issue.
Yeah.
You know, although there's some crackers after that. I mean, that we went I went snobby when they started pumping it full of Warhammer. I'd go in W.H. Smith's and sniff my way through the magazine and think, it's all Warhammer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to buy that. But there were some cracking things. The Judge Dredd scenarios were good in there, and the what was it? There was a Stormbringer one right at the end of the hundreds, weren't there? Which completely missed. Madcap Laughs, yeah. Which we never picked up on. I don't remember seeing that at the time.
No.
I had longer then and was too busy into booze and women.
And on that note, booze and women.
Booze and women. Okay, my pleasure.
See you later, Ed.
See you then.
Hey everyone, Baz off of the Smart Party podcast here. Just to let you know, I've written a role-playing game. It's called The King of Dungeons. It's live on Kickstarter right now until the campaign closes on the 14th of July. If you like dungeoning, dragoning, questing for runes, tunnelling, trolling or even GURPing, then there's something for you to love in King of Dungeons. Create your adventuring guild and fight for the right to undertake lucrative charters in a world full of deadly dungeons, vicious villains and roving rivals. Supply your own alliterative analogies and become the King of Dungeons. See kickstarter.com/projects/King of Dungeons for pledge levels, previews and promises. The value of adventurers can go up as well as down. Advantage and disadvantage can apply. No time wasters must have own pony seat backpack for full encumbrance details.
Attic attack!
Welcome to the attic, where we're surrounded by the relics from gaming's past. It's like that scene at the end of the Raiders of the Lost Ark or a car boot sale, one of those car boot sales, but not with those litre bottles of bleach and high-vis jackets. It's nothing like a car boot sale. I've got Blythy with me.
Hello, Dirk.
Hello. Did you get through that hatch all right?
I managed to, yeah. I think I'm putting on weight. Is the hatch getting smaller?
It's getting smaller.
It's getting smaller.
It's either healing or sealing. One of them.
Shrink spell.
It is. That's what it is. There's no way we're getting bigger.
No,
way.
absolutely not. That's unheard of.
So it's been great, hasn't it? Over the last few weeks, we've been looking through White Dwarf magazine because it was so important to us. It was like the centre of our role playing.
Yes, it was.
And normally we outsource it to the Daily Dwarf, so it's good for us just to sit down and look at it.
It is good for us to look at it, and it's interesting as well to look through them in a methodical and chronological way. Whereas normally when I look through old copies, I just pick any old copy and flick through.
Yeah.
But to look at them chronologically is quite interesting. You can see where you got into it, you can see where you stopped buying it, you can see where there's gaps in the collection. You think, I know why.
And more than that as well, this is really nostalgic because it takes you back to that moment and time when you actually got that issue.
Yes.
Just looking at it at the cover, just going through the adverts and seeing it. It's like hearing a piece of music. You're getting the sights and sounds of a particular moment when it arrived.
Yes, you can tie it back to particular time points in your life when it arrived. When because we subscribed, didn't we?
We did subscribe.
We did subscribe to it. For I think the one I got first subscription copy was the one with Judge Dredd on the front.
Yeah,
that was the one I got subscription, and it was always good because you got it a little bit earlier, didn't you?
Yes. Because it wasn't available in the newsagents to begin with. You could just get it from Games Workshop stores.
Yeah, so we used to buy it from Games Workshop, but then as a Christmas present, I asked my mum and dad if I could have a subscription to it, and that was good because you got it a little bit earlier than everybody else. And otherwise, you had to have a trip to Manchester to. Is Odyssey 7 stock yet? I think Odyssey 7 might.
I think they did, yeah.
And obviously Games Workshop, but yeah, you couldn't buy it in the newsagents. No, not at all.
And it came in a substantial brown envelope, didn't it? It was a nice thick envelope. It felt there was that thrill of getting it through.
It was a thrill, because I think as well there was a sense of a conversation with the outside world. When you got it, it was these other people out there that you weren't talking to them, but they were talking to you through the articles and the letters, and you thought, oh, there's life out there. Other people play these games, not just me and you, and a few friends we've roped in.
Now, the thing of having a discussion about White Dwarf, there's just so much stuff, isn't there?
Yeah,
so
there is actually. It's slightly overwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to set some rules, but just pass them over to me. So they're in that box over there, Golden Wonder box.
Golden Wonder.
Golden Wonder. Where salt and vinegar, crisps, chips if you're in America, crisps. They were blue, weren't they? Salt and vinegar was blue.
Oh, yes.
And cheese and onion was green.
Yes.
And then Walkers came along
and swapped the colours.
Swapped the colours, like a regime change.
Yeah,
isn't
it was all. It threw you a bit, that, as a kid. You'd buy a green bag of Walkers, and you'd think, what's this? Yeah. It's salt and vinegar. It's a mistake in the packaging factory.
But do you not think that it should fill us with hope that regimes can change, like that orthodoxies can change?
Well, for better or worse, though. I mean, you say it can change the other way. There's nothing wrong with the blue-green thing, was there? I'm still a bit slightly annoyed by it.
Oh, yeah.
I still think, come on. Cheese and onion. Somehow cheese and onion should be green. Yeah. I mean, you get green cheese, onions can be green. It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, whether salt and vinegar should be blue, I don't know.
I think all of it's a bit abstract.
Do you think it is? It's like cultural coding, though, isn't it? You know what I mean? It does mean something.
I like to take... I think it's a good thing. It shows that things can change, you know what I mean?
I once saw a TV show about crisps. Do you know why, when you were a kid, it was only certain brands of crisps in your area? When you went somewhere else on your holiday, you couldn't get them. I think it's something to do with the packaging technology. They couldn't make them last long enough, so it was very localised. It was only in the packaging technology when, they managed to keep them fresh that people like Walkers moved in on Golden Wonder's territory. It's kind of crisp wars.
Really?
But that's what it said, yeah. How much truth there is in that.
So globalisation has hit the...
Well, this globalisation going a bit far, isn't it? Because when you go on holiday to Spain or wherever, you just get plain crisps. Yeah. It's a British obsession, I think, the crisp, isn't it? Yeah. All the different flavours.
We've already talked a bit too much about it.
It's more interesting what we usually talk about, isn't it? I'm bored of role-playing. Can we talk about crisps instead? Yeah. Let's talk about crisps. Forget this. White Dwarf. What?
So I've set some rules. So what we're going to do is each pick 3 things. So 1 scenario.
Okay.
1 article.
Yeah.
And 1 oddity.
Oddity?
Yeah.
Oddity?
Well, okay. Something that you found unusual.
Okay. Yeah.
And scenarios are interesting, aren't they? Because it's a bit of a moth memory. Because I assumed, because the titles are in common currency, like it's Sable Rose Affair, and all the names of them, you know them, they're very familiar. But I don't think we played that many of them.
No, we didn't. And I think there was a reason for that. One reason was they didn't always fit with your campaign. So in those days, the one shot wasn't really a thing. We would do campaigns, and you'd read the scenario and then think, it's all right, but it doesn't quite fit. I think the other reason, more sort of pedestrian reason, was we all read the magazine, so you read it. It was always a thing, though. People have read it,
Yeah, even though we had the Prime Directive, which meant that you couldn't, if you were a games master, only you owned the game. There was always a sneaking suspicion that everybody else had read it.
Yeah. And even if you hadn't read it, you'd cast your eye over some of the... It was very difficult to flick past the scenario and not spot the stats, or not spot a picture of a monster, or not spot something in the title that gave something away.
Yeah.
So there was that problem as well. I mean, I don't think I didn't sit there and read the RuneQuest scenarios that you could have run. But at the same time, if there was a picture of a scorpion man or a brew, you'd think, oh, there you go. I know there's one of those in it.
And
so,
there was always a brew.
There's always a brew, yeah. It goes without saying, I suppose.
I think as well that there was that thing where we weren't bold enough to change stuff. So when you saw something, you would read it and think, "Oh no, I don't like that." I remember one of the NPCs having a power storage crystal 15. I thought, nope, they're not having that.
No, can't. You couldn't knock the one off and make it power storage 5.
No.
Somehow you just stopped at that point.
Dismissed the entire thing.
Yeah, I think we did do that in the early days. It was an as read thing, wasn't it? As a sort of, oh well, that says this, so and I don't like that, so I won't run it. Yeah, there was a bit of that to it. Yeah.
And the other thing was this feeling, this sense, and we used to feel it all the time, that you had to have huge parties to do stuff. So they assumed that
it was. It was an adventure for
5 to 10 people.
5 to 10 players or something like that, wasn't it? When you think,
there's only
who are these people? Who are these people who know 10 people? 10 people to play these games. This is us and brought people in who don't really want to play, but we make them. Yeah, it was a bit like that. Yeah, because again, the idea of playing more than one character is an odd thing. I mean, I always remember an article by Lewis Pulsifer, who I'm sure we'll come on to.
Yeah, I'm sure we will.
We're sure we will. Who said something about a typical D&D Eddy, because it was Eddy, wasn't it? Sorry, advanced for Lewis, of course. Party was something like 7 fighters, 4 clerics, 4 magic users, and 2 thieves. And you'd think, but what? But I think what he meant was you would play several characters like a war game.
Yes,
that was the mentality. But to us, it was the idea was you played one character. And that character was almost like you, and therefore you couldn't play more than one. So how do you get 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people to play these scenarios in White Dwarf?
Yeah. So playing these scenarios is a bit of a moth memory. And if you don't know what moth memory is, we call things a moth memory when it's unreliable, because we always assumed that we were playing with a Moff Tarkin figure back in the 70s, but there wasn't one made until the 90s.
No, one wasn't made. Yeah.
So if it's unreliable memory, it's a moth memory.
Dodgy memory.
Okay, so I'm going to let you start first. So what's your scenario?
My scenario is from issue 41, I believe, The Snowbird Mystery by Andy Slack, which is a traveller adventure, linked to an article as well in the same issue, the Covert Survey Bureau, which was like a secret sort of MI6 style organisation that worked for the Imperium. Right. And it's a strange thing, I'd forgotten, until I started flicking through them again in this methodical way, I'd forgotten that I ran this.
And I don't feel as bad now because I'd forgotten that I'd played in it.
I know, it's odd, isn't it? But we played so much then, I suppose it's easy to do. But the Snowbird Mystery is a scenario about a ship that goes missing, and the ship has some combat drug known as YAG, which kind of boosts Space Marines' endurance and stamina, but is highly addictive. And I think what I remember about it was I thought it sounded like a great adventure. It sounded something properly science fiction, this super drug that was addictive. And I think when you found the drug, you just took the drug. And I couldn't quite, as a games master, then cope with the idea that it was highly addictive and for future games you'd be addicted. It seemed like an inconvenience then. It was a bit like, why have they done that? Now they've done that, I have to incorporate this drug addiction into nowadays I would relish that. That would be fantastic. And this is how our role-playing styles changed. Nowadays I would think that's brilliant. I've got them in the palm of my hand. They're addicted to a drug. I can play that for all it's worth. But back then I didn't quite know, and I remember thinking,
it's an inconvenience.
It's an inconvenience now.
Yeah.
So I think next adventure you were cured of. You've been to the traveller equivalent of the Priory. You were cured. But I think it's one of those. Again, it was always this thing in White Dwarf in the early days. There was a lot of stuff for traveller, and it was always really, really useful. But some of the scenarios never quite worked. Sometimes because they didn't feel quite science fiction-y enough. There's another one I ran part of called Skyrig, And that was good because it had this kind of energy-eating... It was on a space station, and it was a sort of infestation of energy-eating aliens, which again felt like something you would want to do with a science fiction.
And I remember the artwork of that. You know, you were saying earlier that it was very familiar, but
yeah. But the Snowbird Mystery by Andy Slack. Andy Slack did loads of stuff for Traveller.
Yeah,
you know.
and there was loads of stuff for Traveller, wasn't there?
Yeah. And of course, because of the the rule that we had, the Prime Directive, I ran Traveller. So it's a really invaluable resource, White Dwarf, because Traveller notoriously had very little to go on in the rule books, you know.
Yeah.
But White Dwarf produced lots and lots of stuff.
Well, the one I've got is Troubles at Ember Trees by Paul Vernon, and I'll go a bit into the story, but the main reason I picked this is the story around it, because as we've said before, because of the Prime Directive, we were never allowed to play D&D because Simon had the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Yeah, so we were only players, weren't we? Only he could run it.
Only he could run it. He'd parked his tank on the lawn of D&D and meant that we couldn't play it for a long period of time.
Yes.
But he only had the Dungeon Master's Guide, therefore we had a very limited idea of what we could do.
It was less that he had D&D and more like he was holding it hostage.
Yeah.
Or at least one of the family members hostage. So he had the Dungeon Master's Guide, so that was enough. He had it at knife point. You couldn't go out and buy Player's Handbook because he had Dungeon Master's Guide. That was enough.
And it very much like a torture situation, wasn't it? Because normally when we played, we would be in his bedroom, and we've explained this before, we would be on the floor, sitting on the floor with our backs to the radiator, like Terry Waite.
It was that hostage situation.
And he would be sat in an elevated position on his chair, plucking at his feet as he was describing situations to us, doing the...
People may prefer it we go back onto the crisps.
But for this one, Troubles at Ember Trees, I always remember it because we did it downstairs. We did it downstairs in the dining room.
It was the dining room table. It was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal.
And I remember him building it up, this story. And it is very atmospheric. I'm reading it now. I can see how it captured his imagination because it's an investigation in a medieval type land. It's very evocative. And you can see how it's like a forerunner to Warhammer. You know, it's that kind of bucolic surroundings with grim and perilous things going on.
Yes.
And of course, this was further developed into Starstone, which is a supplement that was done by Northern Sages, which was always advertised, wasn't it? You always saw it advertised.
Yeah, I can see the artwork now.
Yeah. So it is an intriguing mystery about villagers going missing and the horror, and it goes into the situation. And I remember it very vividly, but I remember that we couldn't do anything.
Oh, no.
We weren't allowed to do anything.
No.
Because we weren't allowed to fight anything.
No. Well, you didn't have the Player's Handbook, so you didn't really know what we were doing.
And when I think about it now, we dismissed him back then, but really it was like a forerunner of like a
narrative game, because
he was clearly playing out this
yes.
version of a story that was presented. But we were just like listening to him. I just remember listening to him.
Yes, it's true that, yeah.
We weren't allowed to do anything. Can we go and speak to him? No.
No, it's a bad narrative game. You know, you're saying like it was just a story.
It's just like a story. I think he just read it to us, didn't he?
He read the scenario to us. But I think what was interesting about it was, and this is relevant to our experience of White Dwarf, which I'll come on to in a minute, but we tolerated it because we were both quite fascinated by advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because the Prime Directive meant we couldn't. You had RuneQuest, I had Traveller, I bought Stormbringer, I bought one or two other fantasy games, which was to get round the Prime Directive, but we couldn't have. And we've talked about this before, haven't we? But it meant that we were very, very attentive in that game, because we thought we're going to get a glimpse here of what it how it works as a game, you know. And it was only later when I bought basic D&D in my find the legal loophole that we started to understand it. And it was one of the problems with White Dwarf. White Dwarf had a lot of AD&D stuff. And one of the difficulties was you would read the AD&D stuff and you couldn't really convert it to your own system because you didn't quite understand it, did you? I remember thinking, what does chaotic good mean? Isn't chaotic bad?
Yeah.
How come this guy's got so many hit points? What does armour class mean? How come low armour class? Powerful monsters seem to have a lower armour class. Surely the higher armour, the better. And all those things, and I think when we played Ember Trees, we were just thinking, here we go. It's going to be a glimpse into the world of advanced D&D. And we didn't.
No, we didn't. And I remember very vividly having a nightmare that featured the Ember Trees chasing me round my nan's house. And as I read it, I thought, I'm going to have to do this. And I'm very keen at some point to revive this. I think we should run it again and see if you can remember it. Yeah. But yeah, Trouble at Ember Trees, a great scenario. Okay, what's your article?
Well, my article, again, I'm afraid it's a Traveller one, and it's from the earliest issue that I owned. So I didn't buy this when it came out, but it was the issue number 16, and it's by Trevor Graver. And it's alternative careers for Traveller. And it's kind of criminal careers, so pirate, assassin, con man, that kind of thing.
It's already making Traveller more exciting.
And that's exactly it. And I think the reason that I've got issue 16 is because it was obviously a back issue that I must have seen. I think when I saw it, that article, I thought, that's for me. I'm in, because suddenly you don't have to be in the Navy or the Merchants or the this or the that. Because that was that problem with Traveller. It's very sort of weirdly conformist that you had to join the Army or the Marines or the Navy or the Merchants. You think he wants to be that? He wants to be a space pirate. There's an article about that. And I think, again, a lot of the Traveller articles in White Dwarf were doing that. They were trying to make Traveller more interesting and more. There's articles on androids, articles on droids, articles on better weapons. There's all these articles in White Dwarf, and essentially the subtext of them is Traveller's a bit boring, isn't it? Why not do this? It's more interesting. Traveller's a bit boring. Why not have some rules about being a space pirate? Okay, thank you very much. And that's why it was such an important magazine.
And did it? I've not seen this one. Is this where you could take people through the careers in entirety, or was it just like hints of the careers?
No, it had like career tables, like in the rowbook. Yeah, it had the kind of little tables of.
We must have gone through them.
I'm sure we did. I think we did. Yeah. I think it's Space Pirates. Yeah, it was essentially the premise of it was, what about people who dodge the draft but turn to a life of crime? You know, they would obviously have some kind of skill base and career as a, you just dodge the draft, jump on a ship and become a space pirate. You're not killed. You're going to pick up some skills, aren't you?
Now they dodge the draft and become president. Anyway, we'll move on. That's a bit of politics there. And my article, in this when you read these older versions now, you can tell that some of the writing is quite pedestrian, isn't it? You can see that people are trying to find a voice to become RPG writers. Yeah. But there was always one name that I could rely on. Probably you with Andy's Dave Morris. When you saw Dave Morris had written an article, you knew that it was going to be good. So it wasn't going to just give you the bones of a situation or give you some background and hope that you will fit it in some way. Yeah. But his Dealing with Demons series.
That's a classic, isn't it, that?
It's absolute classic because it's not only it mechanically deals with summoning demons, the rituals involved, the bargaining and all that kind of thing. So all that in its own is inspiring stuff, isn't it? But it just bristles with ideas and different directions. And the thing I remember about it a lot, and there was a couple of articles that he did, he mentioned Quest World, because it was all done for RuneQuest.
Yeah.
And by that time, we were finding it difficult with Glorantha, but it seemed like a great opportunity to have an alternative world where you weren't constrained by.
And I think as well, it felt magical as well.
Yes.
Summoning demons felt a more magical thing that, as we've said many times, and people have said, sometimes in RuneQuest Glorantha, there was always a lack that magic felt a bit more. It was kind of commonplace, so almost not magic at all.
Yeah.
Whereas summoning a demon felt more like being a wizard, really.
And as I said, when you read it, if you read it now, adventure ideas will start coming in your head.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's just that thing of researching or trying to find something to bargain with, making sure you get the details right, and otherwise it can backfire on you. All those things that instantly start popping things into your head, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
And then it was done over 3 issues, and some of the descriptions that he gives of some of the lesser demons are great. So the Cyrium, a giant maggot with spiders' legs that spits out acid. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. But yeah, dealing with demons is an absolute classic.
It was very popular at the time, I think.
Yeah.
People liked it a lot, didn't they?
And it has a warning at the end: don't go summoning these every week. As if we would. It's going to say you'll upset the balance of your world if you're letting these into your lives every week.
Well, you sort of think you might get eaten by one of them if you keep doing that.
Yeah.
Your luck's going to run out, isn't it? That was kind of the point, really, wasn't it?
But once you've started summoning demons, there's no going back, I guess.
Well, it's getting the right thing, bargain. I mean, don't give it a green bag of crisps. It thinks it's cheese and onion. It's a fatal mistake, isn't it?
Yeah.
The demon says, I'd like a box of cheese and onion crisps. And you buy, these green ones, they're cheese and onion, aren't they? What?
So what have you got as your oddity?
My oddity is an article called On Guard by Gary Drabwell from issue 62. And it covers parrying in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, brilliant!
And I love it this because I think it sums up what was going on in gaming then. Because it's essentially what it does. It says in D&D, when characters are attacked, they've got armour and they've got dexterity. Okay. But they don't have any capacity to parry with the sword. So it says, what happens if someone's cornered, a low-level character's cornered by a monster and has to hold out, and what if he decides to just parry? He's just going to be defensive until his mates arrive who are down the corridor. That's the scenario it puts
Right,
to.
okay.
And it comes up with a really quite convoluted way of doing it, where you get so many points for your class, so many points for your strength, so many points for your dexterity, etc., which works into a percentage that you think you'd have to roll over rather than under to parry. And it's quite convoluted and quite funny when you look at 5th edition D&D that says you can choose to dodge, which means your opponent gets disadvantage on the roll. As simple as that. But what I think's fascinating about it is it's of its time. And what is clearly going on there is the kind of discussions we had where when we did open up the box of AD&D, that was one of the questions we immediately asked because we've been brought up on RuneQuest. And I'd love to know whether Gary Drabwell played a lot of RuneQuest as well, because we immediately thought, in RuneQuest you can parry, where's the rules for parrying in D&D?
And in D&D it's all abstracted, isn't it?
It's abstracted, and it was that kind of clash of gaming cultures of abstracted gaming versus simulationist. And instead of going, D&D is just D&D, that's the way the game works, it's an abstract system, what they've done is sort of, this will not do, this will not stand, I'm going to have to invent a parrying rule, and in doing so invent another convoluted rule for advanced D&D. But it exemplifies so much what was going on in White Dwarf that people were coming up with their own rules, their own crazy ideas of how to change systems.
Well, I've been looking at some fanzines, and there was one in Quasits and Quasars where they were putting hit locations into tunnels and trolls, and that was really, really complicated.
Yeah,
and it just breaks it, doesn't it? Because
it breaks it, and the modern attitude, our attitude now, and that would have been our attitude then.
Yeah.
We would have had those questions in our mind, but the modern attitude now is no. TNT's like that. That's how it works as a game. It doesn't have hit locations. It's doing something different from RuneQuest, and D&D's doing something different. But back in the day, everyone was seeking, and this is what's interesting to compare then with now. It's almost like then, through White Dwarf and through fanzines, everyone was seeking the holy grail of role-playing games and systems. Whereas now what you've got is people say, well, no, this system's great for doing that kind of game, and this system's great for doing this kind of game. But then that wasn't the case.
And as well, the way that things were fixed back then was increasing the level of minutiae, wasn't it? To say, to make this more authentic and real, therefore we need another rule to deliver it. Whereas nowadays, it's the opposite, isn't it? You go simpler and just think, well, you can interpret that if you like.
Things are much simpler,
My oddity, and it really is an oddity, and we picked this up because over the last few weeks we've been doing the White Dwarf Book Club on a Tuesday, inviting members of the Grog Squad to comment on issues of White Dwarf. And one that we've been looking at recently is issue 33, which is the first one that I got. And in that there is the brevet rank for low-level characters by Lou Pulsifer.
This is going to put the on-guard rules into a cocked hat, isn't it, I suspect?
Now, it was very popular to knock Lou Pulsifer.
Yes, he was a controversialist, wasn't he, I think?
Yeah.
That's the word.
Lou's views. But this is funny. So, I mean, the fact that it's called the brevet rank tells you all you need to know, because a brevet rank in military means that it's a rank that you're given, like an honorary rank, where you're not paid at that level. You just acknowledge it being at that level.
Right.
Because what this does, it solves a problem that must occur an awful lot, where you're at a convention and you're running a 9th level game and somebody turns up with a lower level character, maybe 4th level. So what do you do? What do you do in that situation?
I think in the past, Dirk, I've just said sod off. This is for 9th level characters. Are you suggesting there's a way through this?
Well, there are some alternatives.
Oh, I see. Do tell me. I'm keen to learn.
Because you're probably thinking, why not roll a 9th level character?
That is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
In fact, at a convention, I'd just have some 9th level characters in a bag and say, "Here, play one of these." But no, you can't play a 4th level character.
But the trouble with that, you see, what you're doing is giving him a 9th level, or her a 9th level character, and they have not earned it.
You've not.
And that would be unfair.
It's wrong, isn't it? Now you put it like that, I think sod off, you can't play is a better answer.
Or you have the brevet level, where you temporarily confer upon them the 9th level, and then take it away at the end.
How stupid. That sounds just stupid, doesn't it? That's more stupid than saying A, sod off, or B, well, I've just got a pre-gen here. I mean, what are you supposed to do? Your 4th level druid becomes a 9th level druid, and then after the adventure just forgets it all and think, God, that was a good adventure, I felt so much more powerful, but now I'm back to being a 4th level no mark druid who can't shape change.
I think it goes back to that feeling that we had about D&D, that it was intriguing, because we used to read those articles and think, bloody hell, what is this game? It sounds so...
Yes, you're right, that was the thing. It was really mysterious. It was a real mysterious
so
game.
esoteric and weird, and what are all these things? It seemed so complicated, and we wanted to buy into it, but we weren't allowed to.
But we weren't allowed to. We didn't understand it now. No. Yeah, it's an odd thing, and I think as well what it highlights is, but there was a bit of a culture clash in White Dwarf as well, in that D&D players sometimes appeared, and I don't know if I can say this on the podcast, but I will do, like arseholes. You know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They would have an argument for, you haven't earned a 9th level character, and you would think, who are these people? What is going on here?
Yeah.
And there was that sense of there were slightly different camps there, whereas, RuneQuest Traveller wasn't quite like that. But D&D had a propensity to overcomplicate things and perhaps find issues that weren't really there to deal with. There was a bit of that going on. Like the monster mark system, famously, is the most famous example, isn't it? Of such a convoluted thing to work out whether you should throw a goblin against a second level character. I mean, God almighty, you know. But there was that. It was, on the one hand, esoteric, and on the other hand, there was a sense of, are these people a bunch of Burks? I don't know. I'm not sure.
So, I mean, looking over the scale of the White Dwarfs, it's clear that the ones that I've got most memories of are the ones from the mid-30s to the 60s. Yeah. And then any ones before that, I can't really remember using it. And ones afterwards.
And I found as well, when I went through them chronologically, there were gaps. And when I looked at the contents pages of the ones that I didn't have online, the PDFs of the ones I didn't have, I could see why I didn't have it, because there was a point from the sort of was it like 70s, 80s, where you'd get Paranoia, Warhammer, Judge Dredd, Roleplay. I didn't have any of the games, so I must have looked at it and thought, there's nothing in it now for me. And then the next issue I did have, because there was something in that I was interested in, Cthulhu or RuneQuest. So there were those kind of, later on there were those gaps.
I don't know how I feel about the fact that it's lost that feeling of something coming through your door every month, landing on your doormat, and that excitement of having a physical object. That, you know, to new gamers, that sensation isn't there anymore, is it?
Well, no, and I suppose it's like anything these days, music, TV, everything. It used to be quite focused, so it would focus your mind. Here's the magazine, these are the latest games, some reviews of the latest games, here's some new ideas, that kind of thing. Whereas I suppose now the world's just awash with, if you know where to look, it's awash with new games and new things, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the RPG or in any sphere. So yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of lost that, you know. But
well.
But there you go.
And it's gone like a golden wonder. We'll have to.
You can still buy golden wonder, can't you? Yeah. It's harder to get them though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe just as round here.
I don't know. I wonder if they do yank flavour ones.
They are Moorish. The cheese and onion ones, cheese and onion Ringos, they're by Golden Wonder. Maybe they've got a bit of yak in them. I can't stop eating them once I start.
Let's not start eating them, or else we'll never get out of that hatch.
No.
Till next time. See you later, Blythy.
Goodbye.
Next time, Mike talks about his time on White Dwarf and creating the Realm of Chaos supplement for Warhammer, and his experiences of working in the video gaming industry. Daily Dwarf will be back with an overview of White Dwarf's history. Every Tuesday on the grognardfiles.com site, I've started a White Dwarf book club. On a Monday, I roll a D100 on Twitter at the Grognard File and pick an issue to read along in depth. Review copies are available, so please do try and participate, as I'll keep it going for as long as there are 10 comments or more. It's been really enjoyable so far. The Grogzine 19 is now available as a PDF to patrons whenever you join at whatever level. The Grogzine is an annual gift to those who support the Grog Pod. The monthly tips in the hat are important for covering the hosting bills. I've just paid one, and supporting the development of other projects. I'll be revamping the campaign in July. I've got an idea for the Grogzine, which is a bit of a change from previous publications. Watch this space. Thank you to all the patrons. It's great to have your support, and it really does encourage us to try and get this better. I'll be giving an individual shout out to the new patrons in the next part. Until then, adios amigos.